It is 3 o'clock. You can hear me. You can see my screen. If yes, then we can start. Welcome all. Hope you're doing well, safe and healthy. Unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we decided to postpone our GAMP COP Benelux event about data integrity, initially scheduled in May this year. And for the October event about vendor assessments, the GAMP community decided to switch to a virtual event, 2 webinars. There is one today and another one Thursday later this week. Let's wait and see what the year 2021 will bring. But in the meantime, good to know that ISP gives you, as an ISP member, a lot of digital opportunities to connect to each other during this time. Before we start with the webinar, we have some house rules. This is a webinar via the Microsoft Teams. The webinar will be recorded. We make the link available to you after the event, together with presentation slides, just for your convenience, just for personal use, not for publication. Please keep your microphones muted. Please turn off your webcam during the presentations. And for any questions, you can use the chat function in Microsoft Teams. We appreciate your feedback and ask you to fill in an evaluation form. You see the link on the screen. We will share the link with you during the webinar several times so that you do not forget to fill it in. As the chairman of the GAMP COP Benelux, I'm happy to present you the program for today. The program that the team are working on it. We have 2 speaker slots. Each slot is 25 minutes, plus 5 minutes questions and answers. And you can send your questions to us during the presentation using the chat functionality in Teams. After the 2 presentation slots, there is an interactive discussion QA session moderated by the GAMP COP Benelux board. And at the end, we have some news and we do a short wrap up. Let's start with the first presentation by Frans Leijden. Frans is managing director of his own consultancy company, and he is vice chair of the GAMP COP Benelux. So, Frans, I will give the word to
So I'm sharing my screen. Can everyone see the first slide, supplier assessment audits?
Not yet, Frans.
It's on my screen and someone. Can someone give me control, please? Can you see my screen now?
Oh, Frans, we cannot.
I saw PowerPoint startup screen for a very short moment.
This should be it.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Frans.
Okay,
Welcome.
Frans.
Welcome,
The word is
everyone.
to you.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining this GAMP COP seminar. I will speak today about supplier assessments, and I will show you my experiences during an audit at SAS in Cary, North Carolina. And I have about 6 elements I want to discuss with you. Why audit a supplier? What is the purpose of the audit? Ways to audit, what standard or method to use. I will share my experiences and then conclude with a take-home for you. So the first question to answer is why audit the supplier? And first and foremost, it should be from a good business practice perspective, all in the realm of good governance. And in fact, an audit should be an inextricable element of a quality management system. Inextricable is onlosmakelijk for the Dutch audience. And it should be part of the corporate policy. So that's the main objective. Secondly, it could be a contract element when you're working with a partner. It could be a study sponsor. And usually you find this element back in the contract. And thirdly, and that's becoming, well, more and more important, is the regulators. They ask for evidence that you have a good relationship with your vendor. First and foremost, it's for a company, it's important to do in order to establish a long-term relationship. And they should, well, be built organically, and on the way you develop trust, mutual trust, and it takes time. And some of you may know the book by Stephen Covey, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And not so long ago, his son, who is also Stephen Covey, wrote a book called Speed of Trust. And if you Google for that title and you're interested, then read the book, because it gives you a deep insight as to what trust does and how it can speed up relationships, and especially in times of stress. Well, trust is the premise for a sustainable success, and I've pulled up a backbone here, and the reason is that whether you work with this SAP or SAS or LIMS, SDMS, or a chromatography data system, those applications are in fact the backbone of your organization, together with the infrastructure. And so you're dealing with partners that support part of that. So an IT infrastructure company, or the companies I mentioned earlier. And it's in practice, it's an enabler for quick decision making, and that's during daily operations or in times when you run into trouble, and then you can quickly escalate and then find a resolution together with your vendor. And also, when you have a trusted relationship, you can also have contacts in the organization that you can phone on their cell phone on odd hours, or even in the weekends if you're really in trouble. So that's an important element. Also, it minimizes the risk for mishaps and disaster, because in the relationship you can prevent issues, and as the saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Also, the output of an audit is input for your risk register, because during the audit you find out things, and you improve things mutually, and then you can feed that back into your risk register. In fact, an audit is to assure that supplier delivers a robust product or service, which together with your own organization can be deployed in a validated state and in a sustainable way. So that paves the path for a long-time relationship. And that's exactly what you need to achieve. And mindful of W. Edwards Deming, who is widely regarded as the father of quality, the result of a long-term relationship is better and better quality and lower costs. And this is a continuum. So over time, you get better. So the bottom line is that when you have done a good audit, it is a corporate manifest that shows that we as a company have a robust relationship in place with our supplier. And in other words, we know that our backbone is good, it works, it's kosher. And also we know that we are in a position to be able to show that we are in control. So it is also a qualifier during inspections, whether it's an internal audit team or external investigators. So there's some guidance information around, and the one I refer to here is the PICS guide with the name on the screen. And although it is published in 2007, it gives good insight as to what sort of questions you can expect during an inspection. And you can use the same questions during, or similar questions during your audit. And also it's stipulated in paragraph 5 in the document that, well, you must, as a user, you must establish a relationship with your supplier and make sure that they deliver the quality that you need. And it should be documented in an audit report. Now, this is the FDA stance, and FDA expects, pharmaceutical companies to audit the suppliers in the same fashion as your own QMS is audited by FDA investigators. So this means you have to think thoroughly about what you need to do when you inspect your supplier. And once you have done a thorough audit, then you have the showcase in your hand to be able to show to the inspectors that you have a robust relationship in place. So that's another thought here. So the aim of the audit, what is the rationale? And so the question you want to ask yourselves is, what is it that you want to know, and which elements, aspects are to be found out? Well, this goes back to your own organization, and first and foremost, you need to have a profound understanding of your own business process. And so which processes and sub-processes do we have in place for our business process? And so what you need to do, and probably you have done that already, is a flowchart to describe the complete business process and understand relations and interdependencies between processes and sub-processes. And while you're at it, identify and assess the risk for these processes and feed that into a risk register. So you have one place where everything is kept and monitored and updated. And again here, mindful of the father of quality, if you can't describe what you're doing in a process, then you don't know what you're doing. So this is a powerful quote here. Secondly, you have to find out the anatomy of your backbone. Which of our processes and sub-processes are supported by the supplier's application or services? And answers to these questions are entries for your user requirement, and they can be used during acquisition of a system, or if you have a system up and running, then you can use this information when you update the URS. So it's essential that you understand all the functions that the application supports, and you can find that back in your validation suite. So ways to audit. There's a number of ways to audit a supplier, and traditionally there's the postal audit, which is a questionnaire that you send out and get answered, and then you can have your final conclusion in a few iterations and file that. The second one is a desktop audit, and it can be done either WebEx or other tools, or an on-site audit where you do a review of documentation of the QMS and procedures, and we'll ask ancillary questions if you like. A full Monty on-site audit, that means that you go out with an audit team with subject matter experts, an auditor and a consultant, and this is only done for critical applications. Usually it's category 5 or high risk applications, because on-site audits by definition are very expensive, or can be very expensive. So you want to be careful there. So once you decide to do an audit, it's good to know which standard or method to use. Now, there's a number of standards out there. There's 2 named here, and 1911 is a standard guideline for auditing management systems, high level. 15504 goes a little bit more in detail, and it also determines the capabilities. Also, what do you call it? A proficiency test. So you can use it when you want to ask the deeper questions. Of course, we have GAMP, and particularly Appendix M2. It is a good basis, but of course, the last 5-6 years, more and more applications are supported through the cloud. So an extra dimension is needed here, which will find in satellite guides from GAMP, like the IT infrastructure and guide, and the structural data integrity guide. Also, the PICS guide, which is named here, it can be useful. And which one to pick depends on your situation and your appetite as to what depth and breadth you want to go. So these are good reads. A particular read is also this site from Dave Frico, and the URL here, and it gives you some information about CMM, and there's a very extensive model there on the site, and it presents some 800 verification elements when you want to audit a vendor quality system. This is the site of Dave, and as you can see, there's many entry points here, and the one I'm referring to is in the right-hand quarter at the bottom, free checklists and templates. And if you click on that one, you'll find information on the link that I just gave you. And or in practice, you can spend a day on this site or more, but I'll leave it up to you to find out the stuff that you can use. Right. So this is the point where I'm going to share some experiences. I was part of a Novartis vaccines team, which is now GSK, a team of 3 people, a lead auditor from the US, and an IT specialist, a programmer. There was a chap who is a DBA and already had 15 years experience in SAS programming. And myself, I was asked as a consultant to set up the audit and give some ideas as to how to best approach it. We went to Cary, Carolina, and to SAS Institute. And SAS is a rather large company, and it's the largest software company on the globe, who is still privately owned. They have about 14,000 staff, and on the world headquarters site in Cary, there's about 5,500 staff working there. There's almost half of the staff work there. They're listed on the Fortune 500 list of 100 best employers. And funnily enough, in 2014 they were number 2, and this year they were number 60. So the list is quite volatile, but it's useful information anyway. And what they do is they deliver statistical and analysis software, and which is used by the real big players in the world, like banks, governments, but also census bureaus, and like the U.S. Census Bureau and Stratbel in Belgium and CBS in the Netherlands. And so they have many big customers. This is the campus, and this is a part of it. And as you can see from this drone overview, it's very large, and with many buildings with all sub-functions allocated. So this is the campus, and with the buildings we saw in the picture in this area, and here are some other buildings, among which here a business briefing center. And here's the entrance on Harrison Avenue, and when you drive up, so by the way, there's about some 20 odd buildings on this site, really big buildings. And so you enter the site here on Harrison Avenue, and then this is the entrance point, and you see immediately some Dutch artifacts here in the ground. And then you got it to the executive briefing center, which is a recent building, I think, or 7. And it's fully energy neutral. So it can generate its own energy from roof panels and solar panels and so on. And it's really nicely with a nice architecture. And so this is the entrance hall, and so this is the hallway. And when you walk further, there's in the left corner there's a steps downwards to the basement, and you see very advanced restaurants here. This is the salad table, and you can pick whatever you like. But there's also all sorts of bar with Chinese, Mexican, American food, European food, and the chef's table. So there's enormous amounts of diversity there. So this is our team. We were walking down the entrance hall, and then in the far back you turn right, and then you're guided to a briefing room. And the briefing room is allocated for the audit team. And so this is where it all starts. And so you have to be really prepared before you enter this room, because you're going to face a real professional team. And what their aim is to take control of the whole audit day. So usually you have 2 days available, but from the first contact on, they try and take the lead and set the agenda. This is number 1 here. The team. Along with that, a thorough preparation is crucial. So make sure that the audit team calls the shots, as we say it, and not the other way around. So that means that you must, as a team, you must lay down your wants and needs prior to the audit date. And you have to take control of the agenda in terms of dates, topics on the agenda, and also your private moments, so you can talk amongst yourself with the team. And about the topics, usually as a host, of course, they're very keen to show what they have in place, and they want to take you on a tour and show the facilities and show the computer rooms. But before you realize, you spend a morning or maybe also the better part of the first afternoon to spend time on that. So again, I want to emphasize, you as an audit team must define the agenda and also the order of things. Secondly, you want to also make sure that how you are dealing with non-compliances or non-conformities during the audit when you find them, and how they are documented and how their resolutions are made. And then also it's important to look at the table setting. And the reason I'm telling you this is that in the next slide you see again the briefing room, and then usually what they want to do is that they set the auditors on one side and the other people are sitting across. And when you sit as an auditor, when you sit next together, it's very difficult to communicate and have no visual contact or no easy contact. So what you need to do is to make sure that the three of you sit at the head of the table, and you really want to put it down. Otherwise, you lose your eye contact. So the key success factors are to understand what we as a team want to achieve for the company, and you need to agree on that in your own company beforehand. And then secondly, make sure that you're constantly in control, and also tell the host that you want to be in control, and recruit a team of specialists, internal resources, but also an external resource when not all capabilities are in the company. And manage the audit process by relying on a robust method. And what we used partially was PDA Technical Report 32, and it is a 2004 publication by PDA, and I think it's still around. And if not, maybe I can help you get a copy. But it's a very thorough guide, to audit suppliers and who provide computer systems, and particularly for the regulated pharmaceutical industry. And basically, there are 10 chapters in there, varying from quality system, project management, and down to security, training, education, and maintenance. And what you need to do is to select topics for your audit and make the selection based on your risk register. So where you find the most risk, you want to focus on those items. And for instance, one of their quality system, and get the quality system framework, and of course a written quality commitment. And while you're at it, you might as well ask, what definition the company has for quality, because often enough you see quality policies and quality frameworks and the whole manual full of quality items and quality commitment, but hardly ever you find a company that has actually defined what quality means for that company. And usually also the CEO or head of a department comes to do a meet and greet with the audit team, and that's also a good question to ask. What is your interpretation of quality in the company, and does everyone understand that definition, and how do you know everyone understands that definition? And then, well, TR32 gives you a lot of detailed questions on the quality system, but also you want to look at the methodology. How is software developed? Is there a formal written methodology? And do the company use reusable software products, or do they purchase software products and so on? And also look at the source code, what convention they have for developing source code, and particularly source code annotation, and how do you know that source listings conform to the written standards? So those are very important questions to ask during an audit. So if you have the chance, get a copy of TR32 and familiarize yourself with the content, and you can find some very good ideas in there. So to conclude and take home is that number one, preparation is all, and usually it's half the work. And again, make certain the audit team is in the lead and not the other way around. And also make sure that you lay down your wants and needs prior to the audit date. And my advice is to get that done 3 weeks before the audit, and then with the items that we discussed before. And remember, failing to plan is planning for failure. And so come prepared, and preparation is all. So with that, I am open for questions, and hopefully I can answer those. 5 minutes.
Our friends, thank you very much for your presentation. We got one question in the chat box, so I will ask you that. It's about supplier assessment, supplier auditing in relation to a one-time supplier. For instance, if you buy a WFI water system. So what do you think about that, and how should you handle the supplier management of this?
Of course, the purchase of a water for injection system is a one-time thing, although you're going to be using it for at least 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And during that period, you're going to need support from the company. And what you want to assess before the purchase order is whether they can deliver the support that you need. And in other words, if you found a help desk, you want to understand how the help desk is organized, and if there's a professional team there, and not temporary people that just answer the phone, just as a detail. So to come back to the question, even if it's one time, but also that holds for LIMS and SAP, those are one-time purchases, but you're going to be working with those systems for years on end. So yes, it does make sense because it is a critical system.
Perfect, Frans. We got another question, and some people would like to know what the details of the audit that you.
Well, of course, SAS is a professional company, and they have professional staff that also attend the audit. And there's a team of 20 people sitting in the background that can answer questions that we ask. And so they're very professional, although there are always things that need improvement. And this pertains to help desk issues, that arise during live operations, that questions do not get answered right away, or they say, well, we'll come back to you, and they don't come back. Those are the obvious ones. There are other findings and observations that I cannot discuss because it's confidential. But even a very professional company like SAS, I mean, it's life, and things happen and things go wrong, and to measure the company or to assess the company, you need to find out how they respond, and if they're willing to listen to you, and if they're willing to build a relation, and that I can say they will, and they do. So
yeah, I can understand. Okay, we will stop this question and answer, and perhaps we will come back to you later on during the panel discussion.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you very much. Tom?
Yeah, I'm back. So thank you very much, Frans. It's time to move on with presentation 2. In the meantime, on the screen you see the link to the evaluation form, so do not forget to fill it in. The link will be shared by the chat as well. Second presentation for today is from Bert Strouven. He is a validation consultant for CTG Belgium, and his story is about selection of a cloud provider. So over to you, Bert.
Thank you. Let me see if I can
share my presentation. It should be visible, I hope.
Yes.
Everybody can see the presentation. Good. Well, good afternoon, everybody. So for this presentation, I want to talk to you about the validation of an Amazon Web Services cloud-based system. A customer case that we were recently involved in. We as CDG was recently involved in. A case whereby our customer wanted to implement a new custom-built cloud-based solution, which needed to be validated. And as it turned out, this was to be based on Amazon Web Services. And the purpose of the presentation is not to go over the validation file for this customer as such, but rather I would like to use the case, or through this case would like to highlight or point out some of the validation or computerized system validation considerations that are important when dealing with such a delivery or a deployment model. A model where there is a shared responsibility with a cloud provider, partner not always operating within the same regulatory framework, not always aware of some of the documentation and control requirements that you as a regulated company might have. Although I have to say from the start that Amazon does its best in their own way to cater for those types of customers. Secondly, it's not going to be a technical presentation. The purpose is not to go over the Amazon catalog of services and products that they make available. Just to perhaps make that clear from the beginning. To start, to set the scene, just to give some background, without going into too much details. So our customer was, still is, effectively mainly involved in the distribution, wholesale distribution, I should say, of pharmaceutical products for both human and veterinary use. So not a pharmaceutical research or manufacturing company, but as rules and regulations go, for this particular customer, the system or platform, we were or had to deal with the good distribution practices, GDPs, as part of the current good manufacturing practices, as well as the ever-present data security and integrity requirements linked to the applicable GDPs, but then also to, again, in this case, GDPRs, the privacy regulations, and to a lesser extent, SOX, but the European equivalent thereof, the financial rules and regulations. Good. Now, the customer had been working on a new digital platform to allow its clients to use and buy their products and services, and to also better interact and exchange information with their clients. And the exchange of information that had to do with product recalls and complaint handling and so on. And functionality was to be provided by a number of so-called client-facing applications. And the platform itself needed to make use of the latest cloud technology, needed to be flexible, scalable, capable of future expansions, and so on. Reason definitely also the benefits provided by cloud computing. And when we stepped in the project, development of the first of these client-facing applications was ready, and the customer wanted it to be released as soon as possible, i.e. Have it validated and released for production use. So that's a bit of background to the project. But continuing on this introduction, so the first person that we spoke to was the customer's project manager, who explained the basic setup as they saw it of this new platform that they had been working on, and as I just also briefly explained. The user and functional requirements had already been prepared for the first of these client-facing applications, the one that was ready for implementation, and indeed also in progress for the other still under development client-facing applications. So from a validation point of view, a good starting point. But during the conversation that we had with the project manager, Amazon Web Services was also mentioned and essentially confirmed as providing the backend and supporting cloud infrastructure for this new platform. So I wanted to include, as a brief reminder, a recap perhaps on some of the basics of computer systems validation. But based on the customer's existing validation methodology, we were able to quickly establish a validation approach, an approach whereby we would do a phased implementation For the validation of these client-facing applications, when these would be fully developed or the development effort was considered final. And importantly, also a validation approach whereby then possible changes or impact to already deployed client-facing applications could be handled, given the somewhat agile development approach that they had for their client-facing applications. Furthermore, a validation approach that included the hopefully well-known concepts, GAMP 5 concepts as well, of impact assessment and system categorization to take into account regulatory and business impact and system complexity, risk assessment, your validation, risk assessment to help focus the validation effort to pinpoint those areas considered more at risk, as well as vendor and supplier leveraging. And no need to reinvent the wheel. If we can reuse vendor documentation and validation documentation, all the better. But it needs obviously need to be deemed acceptable. To briefly return then to the definition of computer systems validation, computerized systems in the context of a regulated company, they need to be validated, meaning that there is a need to establish documented evidence to demonstrate fitness for intended use, meeting functions that they are designed for, and also adherence to applicable rules and regulations to achieve and also maintain that validated state. And crucially as well, not to be forgotten, the underlying IT infrastructure supporting these computerized systems must be qualified, whether this is physical infrastructure or software-defined virtual online. Which brings us to some of the particulars or the considerations for the selection and qualification of a cloud service provider and the provided IT infrastructure services, and ultimately also then the validation of this cloud-based solution for our customer. So, and let me just already put those on the screen. So whereas the validation approach for the client-facing applications was kind of clear and straightforward, to validate and test against the prepared user and functional requirements for these client-facing applications. What was not clear at this point, and what also could not be provided by the project manager, was what the platform's solution architecture, the infrastructure, was going to look like and who was in charge of its setup. Only then that it was going to be with Amazon Web Services, cloud-based. Now, linked to the previously mentioned infrastructure qualification requirement, applications need to be validated, infrastructure needs to be qualified. So it stands to reason that in order to make any meaningful assessment of the qualification task, one needs to know what your infrastructure is. So when we requested information on the selection of Amazon and how the cloud infrastructure was set up, we were referred to by the project manager to the application developers, and also apparently the persons in charge of the platform's setup. Now, talking to the developers, the thing that became immediately apparent was that there were no real or specific requirements from the customer on the overall platform's infrastructure. Requirements defining the infrastructure or overall platform's capabilities and features or qualities. The requirements that were documented mainly revolved on these client-facing applications. There were no requirements dealing with performance, computing, storage capacity, networking, for instance, availability or contingency, those types of things, backup and disaster recovery, for instance, scalability, security aspects, only apart from those linked to the specific client-facing application requirements. So the overall platform infrastructure requirements were essentially missing or had not been documented, other than perhaps at a very high level in a project mission-like statement, as also mentioned in the introduction of the customer case. The developers, in their role as application developers, had wishlisted and set up a development environment in Amazon with the necessary components for them to develop and test these client-facing applications. However, no consideration had been given on how this development platform was to be translated into a formal first test production-alike environment, but then also subsequently a full production environment. So with this in mind, an exercise to document these infrastructure overall platform requirements was triggered, as well as to clarify and again document, we are validating, also for a broader audience, the overall to-be solution architecture, with the aim to match those requirements to the components that were to make up the final platform's infrastructure. And it's by mentioning these infrastructure components, perhaps, that it's a good time in this regard to also point out that this is what Amazon, as a cloud provider, makes available to its customers. Essentially a large catalog of on-demand cloud-based products and services that include items such as compute, storage, and database, but also networking and various management and deployment tools, components or building blocks that enable you as a customer to create a solution architecture, cloud-based environment to fit your needs, to run your applications. So the image gives you an idea of those components, building blocks that Amazon makes available. So the overall IT infrastructure requirements needed to be documented as a first consideration and as something to tackle in our customer case. Kind of obvious, but kind of also somewhat neglected sometimes, but in our case, and generally speaking for a custom developed application platform, as in our customer case, vitally important to have. So the effort was there to better differentiate client-facing application requirements and overall platform infrastructure requirements. A second element to point out at this stage in the determination of the required components or building blocks for the platform and the exercise to document the infrastructure requirements is that there was an assumption or a bit of a misconception amongst some of the people involved in the discussion. It is not by being in the cloud with Amazon that certain overall security or contingency requirements, such as backup and disaster recovery, are automatically taken care of. Well, this is not the case. To a certain extent, perhaps yes, but not really. These need to be included within your own solution architecture, just as you would select what type of database you want to use or the required storage capacity that you need. Meaning that separate or additional components and services or building blocks needed to be considered for inclusion in the design of our customer's solution and to be configured as applicable to be able to meet specific business and compliance requirements. Which also brings us to what Amazon calls security of the cloud and security in the cloud, and links to a shared responsibility model, of cloud-based solutions. Security in this regard also extending to include other IT compliance controls covering data integrity, accuracy, and availability. As a customer, you are responsible for configuring and using Amazon components and services to maintain appropriate levels of security, protection, and restorability of your content, the applications and the data that you run. You as a customer determine via the solution architecture and configuration where and when to back up your data, indeed where your data will reside, the data center, located in the US or the European Union, for instance. If encryption is needed, access management, what redundancy needs to be built in, and so on. Amazon really has no control over the components and services their customers use and their configuration. Customers self-provision. You choose what you need to have for your infrastructure. Amazon is only responsible for protecting the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure that runs the cloud, the offered components and services, as well as ensuring that the components and services they offer conform to their product specs. As they put it, there's nothing Amazon can do to protect you if you leave the door locked. To take this metaphor a little further, Amazon does provide you with a door, but you need to determine what types of locks that you put on that door. So that was a second consideration that we needed to take into account in our customer case. The platform's solution architecture and configuration environment needed to not only match the IT infrastructure requirements, but also needed to conform to the regulatory and data integrity requirements. And again, we revisited those in the exercise to differentiate the client-facing application requirements with the platform requirements. And then there's also a third element that needed to be addressed in our customer case specifically. It's one thing to define the components or the building blocks needed to architect the final platform's solution architecture. Ownership also needs to be defined. From a business or business ownership point of view, things were again more or less straightforward. As with the client-facing application user and functional requirements, each of these client-facing applications had its business owner or representative accountable for the user and functional requirements. For the overall platform's infrastructure, no specific person within the company had been assigned or had taken the lead. The developers had been given a certain amount of freedom in developing the client-facing applications and, as said, the setup of the platform and the development environment. But then without taking into account or some of the other requirements that we just mentioned. What was missing or what became apparent during our discussions on the needed platform components, and perhaps also the reason why certain requirements had not been taken into account or had been addressed earlier on, was that somebody within the company ultimately needed to take IT ownership, typically somebody from an IT department. Reasons for this, as it turned out, was restructuring and reassignment of roles and responsibilities within our customer's company IT department. That was somewhat to blame and an ongoing exercise that regretfully resulted in this lack of ownership. So that was missing. A certain reliance on third-party developers, no responsible person within the company that could bridge the gap between the developers, the business, and also QA, a person with a certain amount of Amazon Web Services knowledge. But an important aspect and role to have, IT ownership, when it comes to the actual qualification of the platform's infrastructure, and also subsequently in maintaining the qualified state of the infrastructure, which we'll look into in the next slide. Further made important as for the fact that your infrastructure with Amazon Web Services is essentially software-based and managed via an all-important Amazon Web Services root account that grants full control of the components that you have within your infrastructure and their configuration, and which in our case somehow had gotten into the hands of these developers. So that's another consideration to factor in, an account government policy for the Amazon root account to ensure that the credentials used are assigned and controlled by qualified individuals authorized by the organization. The customer, in our case, the platform's IT infrastructure owner, which was then assigned during the project. So with the overall platform's IT infrastructure requirements and matching components and ownership defined or more or less addressed, the actual qualification and, as applicable, the configuration of the cloud-based infrastructure also needed to be handled and documented as part of the infrastructure qualification requirement, linked to the earlier made statement. An activity for which the responsibility lies with the customer. Amazon doesn't provide or configure customer-specific infrastructure. Amazon cannot perform GXP validation or qualification activities on behalf of its customers. Amazon is, as said, responsible for ensuring that the products, the components, the building blocks conform to the product specs, the service level agreements, and commercial IT standards. It is the GXP customers, as our customer was and is, that are responsible for the validation of GXP systems built with Amazon products. So the qualification of cloud-based infrastructure, I think, could be a whole presentation on its own. The installation and deployment of applications and infrastructure are fundamentally different with Amazon products than with traditional physical infrastructure. And different ways exist to approach the qualification of cloud-based infrastructure. Depending on the components and the regulatory context, the complexity of the IT setup, the need to replicate or duplicate infrastructure instances, but also additional tools that Amazon makes available, or the ability to use other non-Amazon third-party verification tools. And apologies. And a fourth element is not forgetting, as in our case, a customer's experience or lack of experience with Amazon and the Amazon or cloud infrastructure deployment model. To make a long story short, perhaps, is in the end, in our customer case, we selected or went with a bit of a hybrid approach, whereby a classic installation qualification protocol was used to document the initial install or deployment and configuration of the selected solution architecture and the client-facing application that was ready for deployment, whilst making use and leveraging as much as possible the information, the technical documentation, the manuals, the instructions as made available by Amazon and their management console to minimize the documentation impact. And this in combination with the provided deployment tools that they have to provision then the platform's production environment ultimately. An approach that better suited, at that point in time at least, better suited with what our customer was used to, and also given a certain time constraint to get this first client-facing application up and running. But nonetheless, the advice was given, and the customer management, their management agreed that to further explore the new options as presented with the Amazon software-based infrastructure deployment model, especially given the fact that other client-facing applications would also need to be deployed in the future with potential solution architecture changes, although these had been factored in as much as possible already in the initial solution architecture. But also given the fact that the IT infrastructure needed to remain qualified, and so as to, in the future, try and alleviate or reduce the documentation impact and change controls, as well as to automate some of the out of necessity still procedural IT controls. So on to a final item having to do with the selection of Amazon and a formal vendor assessment. So when we stepped into the project, Amazon, at least from our point of view, or Amazon Web Services, had already been selected. Indeed, the developer had already set up a development environment in Amazon to test their development work for the client-facing applications that needed to be implemented. So it came as a bit of a surprise when somebody from our customers QA group asked if we could also assist in the vendor assessment process for Amazon, knowing that there was within the company, within the customer's company, an existing process for selecting and assessing vendors and suppliers, and also part of their CSV methodology. A process with a dedicated procedure and linked questionnaires for developers, for vendors and suppliers to complete, but which apparently had not been followed. So this also needed to be addressed, if not then for the vendor selection part, still for the assessment part, to document and take into account potential issues or gaps with what Amazon was to provide product and service and documentation wise, which from a validation point of view definitely serves a purpose, to show that procedures are followed to begin with, or to document the deviation from procedures, but also to show from an inspection or audit readiness perspective even, as also mentioned, I think in Francis' presentation, that you have looked into a vendor's quality capabilities and identified potential risks as you see them and defined possible mitigations. But there's a couple of things that can be said about the vendor assessment, but I'll return to this in a second. But first, to briefly return to the selection of Amazon Web Services. Well, they had already been selected, and no real reasons in our customer case had been revealed or explained as to why, or we were not made aware if any comparison had been made between cloud service providers. So what I can't say is that in our customer case, they had recently begun to use the services of a managed service provider for their physical IT infrastructure. And a managed service provider that happened to be an Amazon partner, network partner. Now, this managed service provider had not been directly involved in the initial stages of our customer's Amazon-based digital platform project. And whether it was due to this partnership with this managed service provider that Amazon had been selected or vice versa, I can't say. But the reason for mentioning this is to point out another consideration with regards to the validation of cloud-based solutions, and that links to agreements with IT suppliers. Agreements with IT suppliers, be it Amazon Web Services or this managed service provider, are important for organizations with GXP systems. These service level agreements, they include statements of responsibilities and commitments between parties involved, and adding another party essentially between Amazon and the customer in our case, if such was to be the case with this future managed service provider, changes the relationship and requires agreements to be reviewed and updated as needed, which was something that we advised our customer on, and also linked them to the requirement for IT infrastructure to be and remain qualified. And indeed also for this managed service provider to be the subject of an assessment itself. As for the vendor assessment part itself, Amazon does not fill in your vendor assessment questionnaire, at least not in our customer case, and from what can be gathered from the Amazon website or from Amazon itself or from their website. And that's not even reading between the lines. As with their products, an Amazon vendor assessment is a self-service thing. As they put it, the leading cloud infrastructure provider, they have a certain take it or leave it feel to it, which is not to say that they are ignorant on what existing or potential customers in regulated industries need. Amazon operates, as they put it, an industry-leading control framework that conforms to current quality, security, and IT standards. And Amazon itself is assessed on a regular basis by third-party auditors. Compliance reports from these audits and assessments are made available to customers to enable them to evaluate Amazon as a supplier or a vendor. Controls include standards such as ISO 27001 or ISO 27017, information security management and cloud security, but also ISO 9001, quality management, as well as the service organization controls, SOC 1, SOC 2, and SOC 3 reports, dealing with things such as security, availability, processing, integrity, confidentiality, and so on. Just to name a few of these standards. And these look into key compliance questions, such as, again, ownership, who owns, how is it organized, how Amazon's SDLC software development lifecycle is organized, managed, and documented, data integrity controls, attestations and certifications of the third-party partners Amazon uses, vulnerability management and patching, and so on. So they are well covered in that regard, which is kind of expected, I guess, for such a company. But ultimately, and that's the point to make in this regard, it is the customer's responsibility to use and go over the available information and to assess via their own processes and make the determination themselves on the Amazon IT controls and quality standards themselves. So that's what we did in our customer case, review the available information and complete the assessment questionnaires as per our customer's procedure, using the information as provided by Amazon, and resulting for our customer in no additional risks or compliance gaps in using the Amazon Web Services or Amazon Web Services as a service provider. So that's the end and the conclusion, or to recap the considerations that were mentioned. So Amazon product awareness as a first consideration, and one that was perhaps missing in our customer case. The documentation of IT infrastructure requirements, and considering the regulatory and IT control requirements in the final solution architecture. The definition of ownership and responsibilities. The review of IT qualification and control practices, which also links to product knowledge and perhaps a shift in current practices on the installation qualification, and evaluate IT service providers and their agreements. So with this, I move over to the questions and answers part.
Hi Bert, thank you very much for your presentation also, like Frans. We did get some questions, so I will start with some of the questions. Yep. So do you know if Amazon is also fully integrated in the Alcoa Plus principles that we use in the GMP?
Well, yes, I think so. There's a good white paper that can be consulted and that I might be able to share a link of. I did not include it in the presentation, but they definitely try to make sure that they adhere to those principles, yes.
Okay, because that would be interesting, I think, for the group. Perhaps we can share that also via our website tooling. So it would be nice if you can find it and you can submit it to the GAMP COP Steerco. Another question is in relation to the ownership of data. And of course, Amazon is an American company. We all know that the FBI demands and requested data. Who's the real owner of the data which we have in the cloud at Amazon?
Well, that's a good and perhaps it's theoretically you own your own data, and they make a point of stating that they do not in any way have access to your data. But I know there's certain publications that especially in the United States of America state that the government can request access to your data. And then Amazon is obliged to give the federal government access to your data. Although there's been a bit of back and forth between then Amazon and the US government in that regard. It's not always that if the government asks that Amazon gives. But ultimately, you own your own data.
Yeah, but it's theoretically, of course, because
theoretically possible, especially given the context of terroristic activities and so on, and yeah, that type of thing. But I don't think pharmaceutical companies are that much affected by that. But
no, yeah, perhaps we don't know. We don't know, of course. But that's the same, of course, for Russia. How do you know that your data is stored if you have a manufacturing in Russia? Firstly, in Russia before it is copied or whatever to elsewhere? Because one of the demands of Russia law is that you need to store your data firstly in Russia.
Well, you can choose the data center. The cloud is how do I say it? There is infrastructure that runs the cloud, right? And Amazon has different data centers all across the world. There's definitely a couple in the United States of America. There's a couple in Europe. I don't know if there's one in Russia. So I can't really answer that part of the question. But for European countries, especially also in the GDPR context, you can put your data not in the US, but in Europe, and also specify in your data backup strategy that the data should not go to the US, for instance. I would assume that for the Russian market, they would also be able to provide that type of assurance. But I'm not sure whether there is an Amazon data center in Russia. So that I haven't checked.
No, but you can restrict at least where the data is supplied to. So
yes.
not all over the world, or restricted to some
which in our customer case, there wasn't a lot of PII data, the privacy data that needed to be retained, but the specific that we specifically demanded for a data center in Europe.
So another question is, do you think Amazon is a typical PaaS or LaaS solution?
I think in this case it was it can be both. It is, but in our case I think it was, although we didn't really use the definitions, it was an infrastructure as a service. You can also have a platform as a service. It kind of depends on how you would like to control your infrastructure.
Yes, and how you build up your network. And
and how you define.
Okay, another question. That's how is Amazon self-service assessment then accepted? So do you have experience already with audits that has been accomplished by, well, other companies or perhaps even inspectors?
Well, they make that
accept that self-service assessment.
Well, they make that information available. So they claim, or they don't claim, they are audited by independent third-party auditors on various aspects, and they make that information available to their customers. But it's the customers that have to go through that information, and that's the gist, I guess. The thing, you have to not just rely on the information provided. I'm hearing myself as an echo. But, so you have to go and look at the information that they provide based upon your own. That's at least the approach that we took, based upon your own.
But you don't have the experience yet that your customer, where you worked for and implemented the Amazon solutions for, has received an audit and
no, I perhaps misunderstood the question. No, I don't know if there was any negative feedback on the way that we approached it, but I'm pretty sure that's the way Amazon does it. And as said, it's not even reading between the lines, and on-site audits are also out of the picture. They make that clear. They provide you with the information, the assessment reports, the compliance reports, and that is the thing that you have to use to make your own assessment. Perhaps so also a bit of the power that they have.
That's a big company, so they have the power to do it.
The customer was a small player, so we really didn't have any leverage to do it any other way.
It's the same like Microsoft, that kind of company.
Yeah.
Last question: would you recommend Amazon to other pharmaceutical companies, or?
From a validation point of view, that's the only good answer I can give. Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
They have a
Thank-
good. They provide good documentation and don't hide it. So yes, yeah, I think
It's
so.
a-
Yes, but
it's
it
an open
depends. You need, yeah, well, you need to set up your own environment, and there's a lot of ways to do it, good and bad ways. So that's also
Okay,
a thing that
thank
has
you
to be
very
taken
much,
into account.
Bert. It was an interesting presentation. For the next session, we have an interactive discussion and a Q&A session. And in the meantime, Frans shared the Kahoot link. Frans, up to you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, we are going to share the next session. And we will have a Kahoot quiz. I hope you can see the screen now, and I'm starting the Kahoot quiz. For the next session, we have some interactivity with some questions.
Frans, could you supply also the code? Oh, the code is up front. Okay, thank you.
Yes, and I see people are logging in already. You can use any device on the web, for example, your cell phone, or open another window on your PC. Take care when you use your PC that you can still see my screen, because the questions and answers will be shared on Kahoot, and on your device you can enter the answer. We have prepared a total of 6 questions for this session, just for fun and hopefully for some discussion afterwards. We've got 8 people online already. We'll wait a minute or so for others to get online. How many attendees do we have at the moment, Tom or Marcel?
25, 30.
30 people at the moment, of which 11 are logged in now, so we'll wait a moment. I hope people will join this. Don't be afraid that once we have started the Kahoot, you can still join, because the pin code will be visible at the bottom of your screen. So you can join the Kahoot quiz at any moment. It will be a little bit more difficult to win, of course, if you are eager to win, but it still will be fun to join. Okay, 16 people seems to be the number of people joining this Kahoot quiz. The number is not raising. As I said before, you can still join after start of this. So due to time limitations, we will start with the first question. Rossi is coming in, very nice. I'll start with the first question, and you can still join once we have started the webinar quiz. The first question. When you're using an IaaS solutions, you have no control over, so be careful. You have to select the right answer. Choose 1 out of 4. Four seconds to go. Not everybody has selected an answer. Last chance. Yes, 6 people have got correct. And maybe we can add some explanation on this. IaaS stands for Infrastructure as a Service, and then you have no control over the server, over the hardware, but you still are in control over the operating system, middleware, and application software. So that's why server is the correct answer. Let's continue. We see that the scoreboard PaaS stands for, well, this one is probably easier. The answers are coming in quickly. Oh, 10 were correct. 6 were thinking platform as a system, but it's platform as a service. We are taking a service, and this is one of the 3 versions you can have when you got a cloud solution. Okay. Not as easy as we thought before, but okay. Going well. What should worry us most when using a GXP cloud solution? And this is from the GAMP guide, so no discussion about this. Yes, I fully agree with 13 of them, but some people are looking at user mistakes and fraud or internet blackout brownout. Why are these not correct? These are, of course, possible causes, but the real problem is if they lead to data security and privacy issues. So there might be many more reasons, but in the end, when a user mistake or fraud does not lead to data security or privacy, it's not really an issue for the GXP inspectors. The same is for internet blackout and brownout. However, a lot of people are paying more attention to this than to the real data security and privacy issues. So that's what should worry us most. And we've learned that from the data integrity guides. Stephen is doing well, 3 correct answers, but he has to do a little bit quicker because time is of course also an issue, not just the correct answer, if you know a little bit about Kahoot. Who is in the lead during an IT vendor audit? Oh, this is a good one for you, Frans.
Well, yes, indeed. As I pointed out in the presentation, as an audit team, you want to make sure that you're in the lead. And although the supplier is the host for the audit, you know, you as a team need to be able to call the shots. Otherwise, you're not going to get the information that you want.
Okay, thank you, Frans. Stephen is doing his best to stay on top. Very good. 2 more to go. What is the most important outcome of a vendor audit? Interesting. Frans?
Well, indeed, trust is the basis for everything, because at the end of the day, you know, you're going to be using that application or a particular infrastructure from a third party, and you want to make sure that you get the services and support that you need. So trust is the qualifier for that. And of course, you will deliver an audit report when you do an audit, and you gain more knowledge about the vendor, and it helps you to make justified decisions. But the most important outcome is that you have a basis to build trust on.
Thank you, Frans. Let's continue. Oh, it's getting between 2 people, trying to be the first. Okay, let's go to the last one. The SaaS model has broad potential, but what is not an option? There was somebody very quick with the first answer. I can guess one of the two was that. Okay, so we've got many answers, but effectively this question comes right out of the guideline of ISPE, which really mentions that the SaaS model has broad potential in broad network access, rapid elasticity, and on-demand self-service. But the only thing that's not possible, of course, is customization. You are not really within a SaaS model able to program anything yourself. It might be configuration, but not customization. So that's why the answer for 5 people were correct. Well, thank you for participating. Let's see what the final outcome is of this quiz. Stephen gets the credits for having all 6 questions correct. Congratulations, Stephen. Very good, very quick also. And of course, you've got our eternal credits for this. Thank you for participating. I'll give it to Frans for the Q&A session then.
Right. So we have got a few minutes left, I guess. So if there are any questions, you can use the chat box to ask your question, and then we can answer them.
I have a question, Frans. You said that the audit of a vendor is a positive input for the risk register, but why do you say it's a positive input? Because I can also imagine there will be a negative input from the audit.
Definitely, and well, basically the risk register is a live document, and it's updated all the time, and accessible for the people that need to have access. And but yes, it's open for positive and negative input. And at the end of the day, the risk register is an instrument that you can use to continually improve on things. So yes.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else who has questions for the Q&A? Then I've got a question about PDA Technical Report 32. You mentioned that, and I also think it's a very interesting report to be used during an audit of a supplier. However, the PDA says that Technical Report 32 is retired because some of the basic things in there are really well outdated. Do you know if there are any other options that are comparable and more modern? Maybe some other people within the attendees have another option for Technical Report 32?
The one I know of is the CMMI model by Carnegie Mellon, and but it's a really extensive model, and the site of Dave Frico, which is in my slide deck, gives a link to that site, and you can find the information there. And the Carnegie Mellon Institute also have published a very extensive risk management guide, and you can find a lot of information there also. So
maybe it's a good idea to share that also in the presentation or on the site later. Yeah. Very good, very nice.
Okay, thank you all. We are at the end of this webinar. I would like to thank you all, speakers, moderators, the whole team who has prepared this event and who makes it possible as a virtual event. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Do not forget to fill in the evaluation form. In the meantime, I shared the right link with you. And then we can close this webinar and stop the recording. If you want, the team session will be open for an extra couple of minutes for smooth talk or for something else that you want to share or to talk with us. So thank you, stay healthy, and see you soon.